Hi, this is Majinoni, and here's my review for the Superman Earth 1 graphic novel by JMS and Shane Davis. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Earth 1 storyline is basically DC's copy of the Ultimate line for Marvel. Why they're having to copy Marvel is, I guess, they're just getting back from Marvel copying them and back and forth. They saw that it's selling, so why not do the same thing in their end? Well, anyways, I really like this, but before I go into the actual story and things like that, I wanted to get a couple things off my chest. If JMS actually put as much love into this story as he did his existing Superman title, I would actually be reading Superman because this is a lot more compelling and interesting than Superman walking across the United States, wandering, doing absolutely nothing. And it's a real shame because you would think that since that's the core Superman title, that's where all the love you would put into the title, and unfortunately that's not the case. Anyways, now before all of you guys out there go, they completely ruined Superman. Clark Kent never did all that stuff. Krypton wasn't like that. They completely ruined the whole story. Let me say this first part. It's not Superman, that you know and love. This is the Ultimate line, so obviously they're going to make some changes to it. Now, Superman's gone through reboots before. You had John Byrne rebooting Superman, with doing the Man of Steel, and everybody and their dog bitched, whined, complained, said Superman was ruined forever. And, guess what? Superman's still here. So, just look at it this way. It's just a simple reboot in another universe. If you don't want to read it, you don't have to. But sitting on the internet complaining that they've completely ruined Superman's not going to change that the book exists and it's still going to sell like crazy. Anyways, first of all, I think the art's really good. Clark. It gets a little getting used to looking at Clark the way they draw him in this. And let's see here. I'll show you an example. Some examples here. Because he just looks a little off. I understand this is a young Clark and whatnot, but he just looks just a little different, which, I think is alright. But, as you can see here, he's just a little, he doesn't quite look like the normal Clark Kent. But I'm willing to accept that just because, it's a younger version of Clark. And, I don't mind there being little changes. Personally, I think this Lois looks like 10 times better than the other Lois. But that's just my personal opinion. Now, the gist of the storyline is this. You have, they altered the basic origin slightly in that, you remember Ma and Pa Kent, they were driving and then they came across the crashed spaceship. In this case, they were hiking. This ship crashed. They found the kid and they took the kid away just as Army helicopters were coming in to examine the wreckage. And the government took the ship and they know something happened, but they don't know what. And so they've been studying it all this time. Now, Clark, they do the same basic origin with him in that, here's this young kid, they're not really training him, but they're teaching him, I guess you can say, small town values, preparing him for, the responsibility of his powers. And in this universe, there's going to be some spoilers, but I'm not going to ruin it that badly. In this universe, Pa Kent's already dead, and Clark makes a promise to him, meaning that he's basically saying, look, I'm going to take care of Ma, and I'm going to make sure she's completely taken care of no matter what happens. So the first part of this book is basically Clark's journey to figure out what he wants to do with his life. For example, he's traveling, through Metropolis. He gets himself a really crappy apartment, and he goes out for football, and they see what he can do, so he's offered millions of dollars. Then he goes to a research company, same thing. He shows them what they can do, and it's all greed. You come join me, and you'll make millions. He goes to baseball, construction, chemistry, Wall Street, all these different companies. And then on a whim, he goes to the Daily Planet, and he basically, Perry's there, and he's giving him the rundown, blah, blah, blah. This is, how we do it here in the big city. And he's just not impressed, and he throws the application in the garbage. And he basically, I don't want to say he's emoing or anything like that, but you can tell he's basically somebody who has extreme power, can do anything he wants to, and he just doesn't know what's going to make him happy. He just knows that he wants to take care of Ma, his mother, and everybody he comes across is basically motivated by greed. So far, the only person who wasn't was Perry, but I'll get more into that in just a second. So anyways, while he's doing all this stuff, eventually what happens is you get an alien invasion. Now, this is where things go a little bit different. And you still have the thing of Krypton, and then, their advanced civilization, but in this world, there was basically another planet that's orbiting, and basically they meet every 20 years. And they have just enough technology to basically jump from one planet to the other planet, so they wage war anytime they come close. Well, this other planet won, and they're the reason why Krypton's no more. So what they're basically doing is they're trying to kill the last son of Krypton. Now, I'm not going to go into why or anything like that, but that's just the gist of it. Clark, eventually gets he finally starts to learn who he is, and he's given the task of revenge. Get revenge for Krypton. Now, I don't know how that's going to work into the overall storyline, but I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with that. Because that's one thing that Superman was never motivated on, is revenge. And if they throw that in there, and that little seed, it could actually make this Superman, I think, a lot more interesting, because he becomes less of a Boy Scout, and then you can really go into the ethics of supreme power with revenge, and what motivates you and what you do with it. So I'm curious to see where they're going to go with that. Anyways, during the invasion, basically everybody's running away, hiding, except for two people, Lois and Jimmy. And they do whatever it takes, basically, to tell the story of what's going on. And they even help Superman. And basically, when he sees that courage, and he sees, how they're the only people that was motivated for something other than, greed, that basically convinces him to sign up with the Daily Planet. And, I'm leaving little bits and pieces out, but that's just the gist of it. Now, I'm really, really looking forward to seeing, the next, when this becomes a regular-ish running series. I'm really looking forward to seeing this. Also, other things, subject matter they talk about is they talk about why there's the S. They talk about, him wearing his mask, why he doesn't wear a mask, things like that. Now, granted, some of that stuff was already talked about in the other Superman title, but I think the way they do it here, it's a great introduction to the character. So if there was somebody, for example, if there's somebody that's like, I really want to get into comics, but I really don't want to get bogged down with all this history and whatnot, this is like a good issue to get for somebody like that. Like I said, the art's fantastic. There's a lot of love in this. It's very simple to understand, very clean, and it actually shows Superman and Clark in a whole new light. Now, one thing I am curious to see what they're going to do is they said this costume cannot be ripped or torn because it's made by the fabrics that was from the ship. So I'm really curious to see what's going to happen if, for example, Earth 1's version of Doomsday comes along, or Brainiac, or whatever. Is that going to actually rip the costume? So I'm kind of curious to see what's going to happen. I highly recommend this book. I mean, it is a little bit more on the expensive side. It's $20, but it is, the holidays are coming along, so like I said, this would make a great Christmas gift, I think, for a comic book fan, and I'm really glad that I picked this up. I'm glad that my comic store convinced me to pick this up. If you have any comments or questions, just let me know. Rate the video up or down, let me know what you think. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll have more reviews up later. So until next time.